Emily and Foduck were gazing out into the harbor when Hank and Theodore floated up. "What are you looking at?" asked Theodore. "We're watching George," said Foduck. "I see him," said Hank. "He's moving Bobby Barge." George was in fact buttoned onto a very heavily loaded Bobby Barge and was slowly pulling him toward the dock. Theodore and Hank could see George was straining under the weight. "He looks ready to blow a gasket," said Hank. "I'll give him some help," said Theodore, and he started after George. "No," said Foduck. "Don't help him." "George has to pull it by himself," said Emily. "It's part of the contest," said Foduck. How did I do?" asked George. "Even better than yesterday, George," said Foduck. "I don't think another tug anywhere will do better." "I'm sure I'll win the towing part of the contest," said George. "You're the best, George. Thanks for the tow." "You're welcome, Bobby." Theodore and Hank could not figure out what was going on. I mean, what contest were they all talking about? Finally, Theodore could stand it no longer. "Would someone please tell me what is going on?" "And me too," said Hank. "The Tugboat of the Year contest," roared George. Now, every tug knows about the famous trophy given out each year to the best tugboat anywhere. The Tug of the Year. And none of our tugs here in the big harbor had ever won it. "Part of the contest is to see how much weight a tug can pull," explained Foduck. "Tugboat of the Year," said Theodore in amazement. "Do you really think you can win, George?" said Hank. "I calculate his chances are very good," said Foduck. "He can't lose," said Emily. "Well, I think you deserve to win the trophy, George," said the dispatcher. "Well, yes," said George, and then added in a louder voice, "Yes, I do deserve it." Over the next few days, the tugboats began to treat George as though he was already the Tugboat of the Year, and George loved all the attention. "The winner of the award for Best Friend of the Tugboat of the Year goes to Theodore," said Hank. "Thank you," said Theodore. "And the winner of the award as Best Friend of the Tugboat of the Year goes to Hank." "Oh, thank you," said Hank. They felt almost as proud and excited as George. Now, said George. "Let's remember I haven't won the award." He paused and then added with a smile, "Yet." Then they all started to laugh. Finally, the big day arrived. The dispatcher called all the tugboats together to announce the winner of the Tugboat of the Year trophy. Foduck had even used his fire hose to make sure George would be especially clean and shiny. "Good luck, George," said Emily. "Luck has nothing to do with it," replied George. "It's all a matter of hard work." "May I have your attention, please?" said the dispatcher. "I have the name of this year's Tugboat of the Year." George took up a position facing the other tugs. The dispatcher continued. "And the winner is Molly the Vehement." "Theodore, who's Molly the Vehement?" whispered Hank. "Quiet, Hank," replied Theodore. "First, I would like to thank all my friends," began George, but then he stopped. See, the name had finally sunk in. "Molly the Vehement?" he said quietly. "I'm sorry, George," said the dispatcher, "but you didn't win this year." It seemed to the other tugs that George grew a bit smaller at that moment. I'm not Tugboat of the Year," he said softly. "But he did very well in all the parts of the contest," said Foduck. "Well, Molly did just a little bit better," said the dispatcher quietly. "It's not fair," said Hank. No, said George. "I've been to the harbor all the way across the ocean where Molly works. She deserves to be the Tugboat of the Year, and I guess I don't." No one spoke as George slowly floated away. "Maybe he just needs some time by himself," said Emily. With George George off by himself for the afternoon. The tugs found their work extra hard. Said Theodore, straining at the tow rope. I don't remember this cargo ship being so heavy. And I don't remember you tugs being so slow, said the ship. Well, that's because George usually helps us, said Hank. I wish he were here now. No one had seen George until he returned to the dock at noon. The tugs expected him to be angry, but George was very quiet as he floated in. You should have won the contest, said Theodore, trying to make George feel better. Well, I guess I'm not as strong as I thought, said George. It was silly of me to think I could win that trophy. I'm glad you're back, George, said Emily, but George didn't seem to hear. He didn't even seem to notice the other tugs watching him. I need a tugboat to work with Bobby Barge at the oil refinery this afternoon, said the dispatcher. None of the tugs spoke. No one liked working at the oil refinery. It was a dirty job. Oh, I'll do it, I guess, said George, sounding very sad. That's not like George at all, said Emily. It's like he doesn't care anymore, said Theodore. There must be something we can do, said Theodore. Come on, Hank. I have an idea. Thanks for helping me out with these oil barrels, George, said Bobby. George only grunted. Bobby wasn't sure if George had heard him. Is your engine all right, George? Called Bobby a little louder. Sure it is, said George. Why? It's just that you're going so much slower than you did when you pulled me for the contest, said Bobby. I guess I'm just not as fast now as I was then, said George. Oh, whatever you say, George, said Bobby. Then after a moment he added, oh, we can finish moving these barrels tomorrow if you can't do it all today. Well, George was still feeling hurt about losing the trophy. But now he was starting to feel even more upset. After all, he'd never left a job without finishing it. Sure, I can move all those barrels today, he said. Hang on, Bobby. George revved his engine, let out a big puff of smoke, and pulled hard. Now, they started to move much faster than before. Bobby smiled to himself as he felt the water rushing beneath him, and when he looked up, George was smiling too. Come on, Bobby, said George. I'll show you how to move oil barrels. In no time, they were ready to move the last load of barrels. I'm full. There's no room for the last barrel, said Bobby. Put it on my deck, said George. I still have a space for that silly old trophy. Put it there. George, I'm really sorry you didn't win the contest, said Bobby. Well, I was too, said George. But you know, all this time we've been moving barrels, I haven't thought about the trophy at all. I really enjoy working with you, George, said Bobby. Well, I really like working with you too, said George. Tough tugging is better than getting some silly little trophy anyway. Shall we move this last load? Said Bobby. Right, said George. I'm ready. Meanwhile, Emily and Foduck were struggling to move a large container ship. We'll never finish this job before dark, Emily, Foduck said. I wish George were here, replied Emily. I am here, said George. Can I help? Yes, please, said Foduck and Emily together. We need you. Are you feeling better, George? Asked Emily. I am now, said George. He was feeling much better now that he knew that all his friends needed him, trophy or no trophy. Let's get this ship moving, he called happily. That evening, after all their jobs were completed for the day, the tugboats gathered as usual at the great ocean dock. Except Theodore and Hank were missing.
"Tugboats," announced the dispatcher. "This evening I have a special presentation to make."
"Yes, the most valuable tug in the Big Harbor Award," said Emily.
"It's for a tug who's always ready to help," started Foduck.
"And friendly and strong," called Theodore and Hank, who were approaching the dock with Bobby Barge. "Yes, very, very strong," added Bobby.
"And the winner is," said the dispatcher, "George the Valiant."
"Me?" said George in surprise. "Yes, you," said Theodore, moving closer to George. "Hank and I made a special trophy just for you, and it's from all of us." "George," said Emily, "we wanted you to know that you're always a very valuable tugboat to us." "The most valuable," called Hank.
"Thanks,"
said George. And there, hanging around his stack, was a special award that Theodore and Hank had made. George could feel himself smiling inside and out. "That special award you made was a good idea, Theodore," whispered the dispatcher.
"This is a wonderful award,"
said George.
"But I think for me, the most valuable thing is having such good friends."